Before we begin, please hit that like button, share, and subscribe for more. Thanks for being part of the story. I had been working as a food delivery rider for several months, usually accepting orders during the late night hours. It was a schedule I preferred, avoiding the heat of the day and enjoying the quieter, cooler atmosphere of the evening. This particular night seemed like any other. I received a delivery order from a restaurant I was familiar with. However, this time, the delivery location was a bit unusual. Instead of the usual customer, it was a new one, a customer from a part of town I had never delivered to before. When I checked the distance on my phone, it was twice as long as usual, quite far, but for night orders, this wasn't unusual. Long-distance nighttime deliveries are part of the job, and although they come with certain risks and can be quite scary, the pay was higher for long-distance deliveries, so I accepted it without hesitation. After all, late-night deliveries meant fewer cars on the road, and therefore less traffic. But this ride turned out to be anything but smooth. Because of the long distance, I decided to stick with my usual night shift strategy, teaming up with a friend, another delivery rider who worked similar hours. We had an arrangement where, if either of us got a long-distance order after dark, we'd ride together, taking turns, one riding, the other sitting on the back of the bike. That way, we wouldn't have to face the dangers of the night alone. It was a good strategy, far better than sitting idly waiting for the next order. It was a safety measure, both for physical protection on empty, deserted roads and, though we never said it aloud, to ward off the eerie sense of isolation that came with these nighttime deliveries. That night, I was riding on the back while my friend drove. We left the restaurant and followed the GPS, which directed us toward the outskirts of town. The roads grew narrower, and the streetlights became more sporadic, casting long, eerie shadows that stretched across the road. To pass the time, we talked about random things, mostly joking around to keep the mood light, but there was an uneasy feeling, the kind you feel when you're heading into unknown territory in the dead of night. As we neared the delivery point, I called the customer to confirm the order and make sure they'd be waiting to receive it. Everything seemed normal, the customer answered, confirming they were expecting the delivery. However, not long after, as we got farther away from the city center, something unexpected happened. The GPS suddenly recalculated the route, offering a new, much shorter path. What had been a longer distance now shortened by 5 kilometers. A shortcut had appeared. I was relieved. It meant we'd get there faster, save some time, and wrap up this odd, far-off delivery sooner. But my friend wasn't so sure about the new route and warned me with a serious tone.
Didn't you ever watch ghost shows? When the GPS changes the route like that, it's always because you'll run into ghosts.
I scoffed at the thought. I wasn't one to believe in ghosts or supernatural warnings. Don't be ridiculous. Let's just follow the GPS and we can get there faster. We continued debating whether to take the shortcut or not until we finally pulled over at a 4-way intersection to discuss it. This particular intersection had a traffic light that worked normally during the day, but switched to a flashing yellow at night, warning drivers to be cautious. As we stopped there to talk, a sudden bright light appeared behind us. It was the headlight of another motorcycle approaching. Alarmed, my friend said,
"Hey, there's someone following us."
We both turned to see another rider approaching, but he was from a different delivery company. He pulled up right next to us, his face suggesting he was in his late 20s. His uniform looked familiar, yet something about it felt oddly out of place. At first glance, he appeared normal, but something about him was unsettling. His eyes were cold, and his face was disturbingly expressionless. When he spoke, his voice was flat and mechanical, almost devoid of emotion.
"Are you guys delivering an order?"
he asked. A chill ran down my spine. My friend looked uneasy too, though we couldn't quite figure out why. Running into other riders at night wasn't unusual, but his voice, it was distant, hollow, and seemed to linger in the air long after he'd spoken. We didn't know how to respond. The delivery rider repeated,
"Are you guys delivering an order?"
"Yeah, we're delivering an order," I finally said, trying to sound casual. "Why?" The rider offered to guide us.
"Do you want me to lead the way?" "I'm going to the same area,"
he said. It was an unusual and oddly friendly offer, especially coming from a competitor. Delivery riders didn't usually help each other out, especially not this late at night. Still feeling uneasy, I asked, "How would you know where we're headed? Are you delivering to the same place?" I glanced at his phone, mounted on his motorcycle, and saw that his destination was indeed very close to ours. Eager to finish the delivery, I decided to follow him. My friend, though hesitant, didn't argue further. "All right, you go ahead and we'll follow," I said. The mysterious rider nodded silently and began driving off. As we followed, my friend told me to keep some distance and not get too close. His gut was telling him something wasn't right. We continued riding down a 2-lane road, sparsely lit by the occasional street light, which only made the atmosphere more unsettling. My friend started to worry and leaned in to whisper to my ear,
Something doesn't feel right about this guy. Do you think he's trying to set us up? Maybe to rob us at gunpoint?
I glanced at the rider ahead and shook my head. "Nah, man, you're just spooked. It's the middle of the night, and we're in the middle of nowhere. You've been watching too many horror stories. There's nothing to worry about." Just as we were discussing our concerns, the rider ahead of us did something impossible. Instead of turning at a normal angle along with his body, his head began rotating unnaturally, 180 degrees, all the way around. Yet his body remained perfectly still, like an owl's, his dead eyes locking onto me and my friend. His neck twisted in a grotesque, unnatural way, but his body stayed motionless, riding forward as if nothing had changed. Moments later, his head continued to rotate in the same direction, completing a full 360-degree turn. Panic washed over me. I lowered my head instinctively, too terrified to keep looking. When I finally forced myself to glance up again, the rider and his motorcycle were gone, completely vanished. Stunned and shaken, we pulled over to the side of the road, trying to make sense of what had just happened. We looked around, thinking maybe he had turned off onto a side road or had crashed somewhere nearby. But the road was empty, no sign of him, no sound of a motorcycle. Just darkness and an eerie, suffocating silence. Moments later, just when I thought we were safe and tried to regain my composure, I heard the unmistakable roar of an engine behind us. Turning around, I saw another motorcycle's light appear from behind, approaching fast. To my absolute horror, it was the same rider, the one whose head had rotated 360 degrees. His head was back to normal now, but his face was even more expressionless, more unnerving than before. He pulled up next to us just as he had earlier, and in that same cold, mechanical voice asked,
"Are you guys delivering an order?"
Terrified, my friend didn't wait for an answer. He immediately started the motorcycle and sped off, driving as fast as he could, pushing it to its limit. Neither of us dared to look back, focusing only on the road ahead as we raced away until we finally saw the faint glow of distant lights from nearby houses. We reached a small village and, without hesitation, pulled up to the nearest house, banging on the door and begging for help. Our hands were shaking, and our voices trembled as we explained to the startled villagers what had just happened. The people at the house were shocked, but quickly gathered around to help calm us down. An elderly man among them asked what had happened, and I recounted the entire terrifying experience. After listening, the man sighed and said,
"It hasn't left yet."
He then told us that about a week ago, at around 1 a.m., a delivery rider had died in a crash at the exact spot we had just come from. The rider had collided with a broken-down farm vehicle that had been left on the roadside without any warning lights or signs. The rider's neck had been broken in the crash, and he had died instantly. Upon hearing this, I felt my skin crawl. I was convinced that the spirit we had encountered was the ghost of that unfortunate rider. The next day, I shared my experience with the other riders at the restaurant where we usually gathered. Another rider from a different delivery service overheard the story and asked about it. When I explained what had happened, the man revealed that the deceased rider had been his friend. He went on to explain that on the night his friend had died, Everyone had been waiting for their orders as usual. His friend had accepted an order and gone out to deliver it, but never returned. They later learned that he had died in the accident. The strange part was that, around 2 a.m., after his friend had already died, some of them saw him return to the restaurant, sit down, and light a cigarette as if nothing had happened. He didn't speak to anyone and just sat there, waiting for more orders. It wasn't until the next day that they learned their friend had died at 1 a.m., long before he had shown up, sitting at the table and lighting a cigarette. The creepy part was that his ghost seemed to have continued writing, as if nothing had happened.